October 25th, 1944. 6:45 hours. The Philippine Sea is deceptively calm. 1 destroyer. 6 hours of absolute chaos. A victory that defied every law of naval warfare. 1 destroyer. 6 hours of absolute chaos. A victory that defied every law of naval warfare. The USS Johnston was a tin can fin-skinned. And outgunned. To the Japanese fleet, she was a minor nuisance to be brushed aside. The USS Johnston was a tin can thin-skinned and outgunned. To the Japanese fleet, she was a minor nuisance to be brushed aside. Task Unit 77.4. 3. Calcine Taffy 3 was never meant to fight a surface battle. They were screened for small escort carriers, protecting the invasion beaches. Task Unit 77.4. 3. Calcine Taffy 3 was never meant to fight a surface battle. They were a screen for small escort carriers, protecting the invasion beaches. Commander Ernest Evans, a man of Native American heritage, didn't believe in retreat. He told his crew, "I will never back down from a fight." Commander Ernest Evans, a man of Native American heritage, didn't believe in retreat. He told his crew, "I will never back down from a fight." Suddenly, giant geysers of dyed water erupted around the American ships. The Japanese center force had arrived, led by the gargantuan battleship Yamato. Suddenly, giant geysers of dyed water erupted around the American ships. The Japanese center force had arrived, led by the gargantuan battleship Yamato. The odds were impossible. The Yamato's shells were the size of Volkswagens. The Johnston's armor was barely an inch thick. The odds were impossible. The Yamato's shells were the size of Volkswagens. The Johnston's armor was barely an inch thick. Military analysts today still call this the most lopsided surface engagement in history. Every expert predicted the total annihilation of Taffy 3 within minutes. Military analysts today still call this the most lopsided surface engagement in history. Every expert predicted the total annihilation of Taffy 3 within minutes. But on this specific morning, everything changed when Commander Evans did the unthinkable. He didn't turn away. He ordered the Johnston to charge. But on this specific morning, everything changed when Commander Evans did the unthinkable. He didn't turn away. He ordered the Johnston to charge. The tactic he used, it's a strategy still taught at Annapolis today. He was about to do the impossible. What happened in the next 180 minutes would rewrite naval doctrine forever. Because Evans didn't just survive, he attacked a fleet 20 times his size. And the method he used, it's a tactic still taught at Annapolis today. Our story begins 3 hours before the first shot, as Taffy 3 patrolled the coast. The morning was routine, with ships maintaining a defensive screen for the troops landing at Leyte. Their goal was simple: destroy the American invasion force at all costs. He opened his throttles to flank speed, the ship vibrating under the strain of the engines. The Johnston was now a target, drawing fire away from the flat tops. The smoke was thick and oily, clinging to the water's surface. It was the only shield the American sailors had against the coming storm. The black clouds billowed from the funnels, creating a massive curtain of soot. The Johnston's 5-inch guns began to bark, firing at a range of 18,000 yards. They were stinging the giants to draw their attention. The Yamato's guns were nearly as wide as the Johnston's entire deck. Evans' new guns wouldn't sink a battleship. He closed the distance to 10,000 yards suicide, ranged to launch his 10 Mark 15 torpedoes. He drove the ship through a forest of falling steel, weaving between the geysers. The targets were the heavy cruisers Kumano and Suzuya. The Johnston was a lone wolf, dancing through a forest of falling steel, a direct hit. The Kumano's bow was blown clean off, and the Suzuya was forced to stop to assist. The impossible had its first victory. But here is what nobody knew at the time. The Johnston was now out of torpedoes and completely exposed. The next 60 seconds would decide if Evans was a hero or a martyr. 3 massive shells ripped through the Johnston's thin deck like tissue paper. The aft engine room was destroyed, cutting the ship's speed in half. Fires broke out near the ammunition lockers, threatening a total explosion. Damage control teams rushed into the smoke, fighting for every inch of the ship. The Johnston slowed to a crawl, a sitting duck in the open water. Evans was wounded, his fingers blown off, and his shirt shredded. He didn't go to the infirmary. He stayed on the bridge, shouting commands. He wrapped his hand in a blood-stained handkerchief and kept his eyes on the horizon. His focus was entirely on the safety of the carrier group. A sudden rain squall appeared, a gift from the heavens. The heavy rain provided a natural smoke screen, masking the ship's heat signature and silhouette. It was a momentary reprieve in a morning of fire. For 10 minutes, the crew performed miracles. They restored power to the remaining engine and cleared the jammed guns while the ship listed to port. The engineers worked in waist-deep water, bypassing broken lines to keep the ship moving. Every man knew that if they stopped, they died. The battle was becoming a chaotic melee. The Ho, Hirman, and Samuel B. Roberts threw themselves at the enemy. This tiny group of ships was now a wall of defiance against the Imperial Navy. The Japanese commanders were baffled. The relentless nature of the American attack suggested they had heavy support nearby. Admiral Kurita began to doubt his own intelligence reports. Evans emerged from the rain like a ghost, even with half power and no torpedoes. He ordered the Johnston to support the Hull's attack. The Japanese squadron leader, intimidated by the ferocious American ship, launched his torpedoes too early and turned away. The American aggression had caused the Japanese to lose their nerve. They flinched at the sight of the battered Johnston coming straight for them. Because of the Johnston's interference, every single Japanese torpedo missed its mark. The carriers were saved, but the Johnston was now the primary target. The carrier group was successfully moving away toward safety. Evans had bought them the minutes they needed. With the blood of his ship, the Japanese fleet finally realized the Johnston was alone. They began to bracket her, firing from all sides in a coordinated execution. Shells from cruisers and battleships began to find their marks with deadly precision. The sea around the Johnston was a boiling cauldron of explosions. The bridge was gone. Evans moved to the fantail, shouting steering orders down a hatch to the men manually moving the rudder below. He was standing on the deck, exposed to the shrapnel, directing the ship by hand. His leadership was the only thing keeping the crew together. The Japanese used colored dyes in their shells to track their shots. The Johnston was sailing through a rainbow of death. Bright yellow, blue, and red splashes surrounded the hull. It was a surreal and terrifying sight as the ship was slowly dismantled. "Target the bridge of that cruiser," Evans yelled, even as his ship was sinking. He was looking for ways to inflict pain on the enemy. They fired until the barrels were too hot to touch. The Johnston was going down, but she was going down swinging. This is where it gets really interesting. At the very moment the Johnston was going down, a Japanese destroyer captain did something that shocked every survivor in the water. At 9:45, Evans finally gave the order. Abandon ship. The bravest tin can in the Navy had nothing left to give. The ship was dead in the water, listing heavily to one side. The final whistle blew, signaling the end of her incredible journey. Men scrambled into life rafts or simply clung to debris. They watched as their home for the last year began its final plunge. The ocean was thick with oil and the smell of gunpowder. The silence that followed the engines stopping was heavier than the gunfire. As the Johnston sank, a Japanese destroyer pulled alongside the survivors. The Americans braced for machine gun fire, a common horror in the Pacific. The enemy ship loomed over them, its crew lining the rails. The survivors held their breath, waiting for the worst. Instead, the Japanese captain stood on his bridge and saluted. He had seen the Johnston's courage and, in a rare moment of samurai-like respect, honored his foe. It was a moment of profound humanity in the middle of a brutal war. The Japanese recognized they had fought a legendary opponent. Out of the 327 men on board, only 141 survived the battle and the days in the water that followed. Commander Evans was not among them. He was last seen on the fantail, ensuring his men got off safely. His sacrifice became the heartbeat of the Navy's destroyer tradition. The miracle was complete. Admiral Kurita, convinced he was fighting the entire U.S. Third Fleet, ordered a general retreat. Taffy 3 had won. The Japanese had victory in their grasp, but they turned and ran. They had been beaten psychologically by a handful of small ships. The impossible victory saved the Leyte invasion. If the Johnston hadn't charged, the Japanese would have decimated the landing beaches. Thousands of American soldiers would have been trapped on the shore without support. The entire Pacific campaign hung in the balance that morning. Commander Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. He was the first Native American in the U.S. Navy to receive the nation's highest award. His citation noted his untiring and brilliant leadership. He had lived up to his word. He never backed down from a fight. In 2021, the wreck of the Johnston was discovered at 21,180 feet, the deepest shipwreck ever surveyed at the time. She still looks ready for a fight. The footage showed the hull numbers still visible through the silt. Even in the crushing depths, the Johnston remains a sentinel of history. Here's why this matters today. The Johnston method, using aggression to mask weaknesses, a fundamental pillar of asymmetric warfare. But how do you apply this impossible logic to your own life? Let's break down the tactical innovation. Evans used aggressive obscuration. By attacking, he forced the enemy to react rather than act. In any conflict, the person who dictates the pace has the advantage. Evans seized the initiative from a vastly superior force. Notice how he never stayed on one course for more than 30 seconds. This made it impossible for the Japanese fire control computers to calculate a solution. By being unpredictable, he neutralized the enemy's technological edge. He turned their complex systems against them. The technical specs of the Fletcher class were vital. They had split-plant propulsion, meaning even with one engine destroyed, the ship could still maneuver. This design redundancy was the difference between life and death. It allowed the Johnston to stay in the fight long after other ships would have sunk. Lieutenant Robert Hagen later said, "We were like a David without a slingshot, just throwing rocks." But those rocks changed the course of history. It wasn't the size of the weapon, but the persistence of the fire. They hit the Japanese so often they simply overwhelmed their ability to respond. The Johnston fired 5-inch shells. The Yamato fired 18-inch shells. It's like a boxer fighting a tank, yet the boxer won by being too fast to hit. The speed and agility of the destroyer were its only defense. Evans used that mobility to create an illusion of invincibility. The news of the Battle off Samar stunned the Pentagon. It proved that individual initiative could overcome massive technological gaps. It led to a shift in how the Navy trained its officers. Courage was no longer just a virtue. It was a tactical necessity. "I can't believe a ship that small can fight that hard." This quote from a captured Japanese diary summarizes the spirit of the crew. It shows that even the enemy was moved by what they saw. Bravery is a universal language that demands respect. After the war, the U.S. Navy studied the Johnston to develop small ship tactics used throughout the Cold War to deter larger Soviet formations. The lessons of Samar were applied to the missile age. The idea of the force multiplier began with the Johnston. Today, modern destroyers follow the Johnston's lineage, fast, versatile, and capable of punching way above their weight class. The Albert-class destroyers are the direct spiritual descendants of the 557. They carry the same philosophy of aggressive defense. Evans was the first Native American to have a destroyer named after him. The USS Evans. The Uno Cero Dos. His legacy continues to inspire sailors of all backgrounds. His story is a reminder that excellence knows no boundaries. He was a warrior in the truest sense of his heritage. It wasn't just the captain. It was the cook who carried ammo, the medic who stayed in the flooding hold, and the engineers who kept the boilers alive. Every man on the Johnston was a hero that day. It was a collective act of defiance that no one person could have achieved alone. A number that should have been forgotten in the vast Pacific, now etched in the annals of the greatest generation. It stands for more than a ship. It stands for a moment when the impossible became reality. It is a symbol of American naval power. But what is the modern application of this story? In the final 10 scenes, we'll show you how the Johnston strategy is being used in cyber warfare and modern tech today. In the digital age, aggressive defense is the new Johnston method. Small startups and security firms use these same principles to thwart massive hacking attempts. They use speed and agility to outmaneuver massive bots. They act bigger than they are to discourage further attacks. Just as Evans used smoke to hide his carriers, modern engineers use honeypots to lure and confuse attackers, buying time for the main system. By creating false targets, they protect the core assets. It is the same strategy of deception used in the Philippine Sea. The lesson is universal. When you are outnumbered, you must change the rules of the game. Don't fight on their terms, fight on yours. Adaptability is the greatest weapon in any arsenal. If you can't be stronger, be smarter and more aggressive. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, the words remain as powerful today as in 1944. The Medal of Honor citation is a blueprint for leadership. It reminds us that one person can indeed change the course of history. The Battle of Samar was a victory of the human spirit over numerical probability. It is the definition of impossible. It proves that stats on a page don't win wars. Hearts and minds do. Today, the Johnston sits in the dark, silent depths. She's a monument to the 186 men who stayed with her until the very end. The wreck is a war grave, respected by all nations. It is a place of absolute peace. After a morning of fire, the survivors met for decades, telling the story of the little ship that could. Their numbers have dwindled, but the story is now ours to tell. We carry their memory forward. We ensure that their sacrifice wasn't just a footnote in a history book. Every year, ships passing over the site of the sinking perform a ceremony. They remember the ship that charged when everyone else ran. The sound of the bell ringing across the water is a tribute to the 557. It is a promise that they will never be forgotten. 1 destroyer. 2 battleships damaged. 1 cruiser effectively sunk. The stats don't make sense, but history doesn't lie. It is the greatest upset in naval history. And it happened because one man refused to believe it was impossible. If there is one thing to take away from the USS Johnston, it's this. No odds are too great if you have the courage to strike first. But there's another story even more incredible than this one. Next week, we'll dive into the story of the submarine that took on an entire carrier group. You won't believe the tactic they used to get inside the perimeter. It's a story of stealth, patience, and a single shot that changed everything. You don't want to miss it. If you want more stories of tactical innovation against impossible odds, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Help us grow this community of history and military enthusiasts. Your support allows us to bring these legends to life. We tell the stories that history books often gloss over. The moments where bravery changed the map of the world. From the depths of the ocean to the reaches of space, we explored the human spirit. Join us on this journey. Rest in peace, Commander Evans. Your impossible victory will never be forgotten. The Johnston may be at the bottom of the sea, but her story is soaring. She is the eternal tin can. Thanks for watching. See you on the next mission. Until next time, keep studying the tactics of the past to win the battles of the future.